So for our second plenary today, we're going to have a panel of individuals with lived experience. Paul Solomon is going to be moderating that discussion, and so I will turn it over to Paul now.
Well, welcome again. If I could get our panelists to come up and take a seat here, we'll get started momentarily. As they do that, let me start to introduce this panel. We are in for a truly remarkable discussion today. This panel brings together three remarkable individuals who have successfully navigated Oregon's criminal legal system despite significant challenges, forging a bright path forward. They will share their experiences with incarceration, reentry, and finding success in the community. As we envision the future of Oregon's criminal legal system, it is essential that we center the voices of those with lived experience. The people closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. You'll hear me say that probably more than 2 or 3 times over the course of the next couple of days. We are at a pivotal moment where treatment courts, reentry programs, restorative justice, JLMOUD are increasingly recognized as valuable interventions. Those with lived experience play a crucial role in shaping and delivering these evidence-based strategies, profoundly impacting the lives of individuals involved in our system. As someone who has spent time in the criminal legal system, albeit over 30 years ago, I understand firsthand the immense barriers that exist for people re-entering the community under the best of circumstances. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from 3 people I deeply admire who will share their journeys and insights on what meaningful change looks like. First, we'll hear from Sterling Cuneo. Sterling is an award-winning author, playwright, and poet, an Oregon Literary Arts Fellow, PEN American Arts for Social Justice Fellow, and World Yes Jammer, whose work has been published in the Marshall Project, LA Book Review, and performances by various artists, including Grammy Award-winning musician Antino Sanchez. Sterling now works as a lead consultant on the Ubuntu Climate Initiative, a global climate resilience movement focused on reuniting people and planet through joy, art, and sustainability. We will next hear from Christopher Lambert. After over 2 decades behind bars, Christopher turned his pain into purpose. Now the Regional Service Director of Rose City Jam at the Oregon Justice Network, he is dedicated to breaking cycles, creating opportunities, and inspiring others to rise above their past. Finally, we'll hear from Dr. Nick Krapser. Dr. Krapser is currently the clinical director at 4D Recovery, a recovery organization for young people. His education is in chemical dependency studies. Dr. Krapser previously worked as a behavioral services manager at the Oregon State Penitentiary, where he started a peer recovery mentor program, licensing adults in custody as certified recovery mentors and as certified drug and alcohol counselors. His passions are helping youth, those justice involved, and those suffering from mental health and substance use disorders. As with the previous panelists, we'll have a few minutes for Q&A, so please start texting your questions to Carol, and we'll try and get through as many of those as we can. But without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our 3 panelists. All right, Sterling, kick us off.
All right, to sit down or what?
Yeah,
okay.
However you want to be.
Hello, y'all. Thank you. It's an honor. My name is Sterling Cuneo. It's a real honor and privilege to be here and have this opportunity to just share a little bit of my experiences. Is this timer on, or how are we doing this?
It's not, but it should be. We'll have somebody checking the time.
Watch me. I'm gonna give y'all the abbreviated version. You know, my experience with the criminal legal system literally includes every level, from after-school detention to push-out policies to juvenile detention to foster care to arrest to trial to court of appeals to federal courts to legislation to solitary confinement, maximum security prison, and reentry programs afterwards. So I'm going to try to do it quickly. The first 12 years of my life, I was actually raised in a stable home environment, loving home environment, free of drugs, alcohol, violence of any kind. Same lifelong childhood or childhood long friends, same school, all of that stuff. And then my mom died when I was 12. And after that, I was spent the next 2 years bouncing around a total of 7 times between 4 states before ending up homeless at 14 years old, sleeping in newspaper recycle bins just a few blocks from this building. While in the streets, I became adept and familiar with and a participant in the culture of street crime, and my activities started as vandalism at first, stealing food second, and then just escalated as I became more and more contact with the system. Truthfully, at first, my criminal activity, I literally just began as a kid with nothing else to do, so we threw rocks through windows for nighttime entertainment. And that led to police contact, which led to arrest, which led to placement in juvenile homes or juvenile facilities. And in them juvenile facilities, I began to become exposed to the culture of street crime and start to model and adapt those ethics and those codes and live by some of those and live by that lifestyle, which my behavior only continued to escalate until I committed acts of violence, serious violence, and was sentenced to consecutive life without the possibility of parole sentences at the age of 16 years old, before Oregon law allowed juvenile lifers allowed for juvenile lifers. So there was a lot of litigation and court issues around my case, and as it related to me and a set of law that related to 4 other boys at this time. And so while I was there, and when I first got there, this is what I want to share unequivocally. When I first got to prison, it made me worse. It literally made me worse. Even though I have went to prison for committing the most grave act that one human being could commit against another and taking a life, but when I first got there, I didn't have to account for that. The only thing from the time of arrest, they told me right from the gate, anything I said could be and would be used against me, so just keep my mouth shut. And then when in court, everything about this harm and this offense, it was only looked at in the context of mitigating or aggravating. Defense attorneys did their best to try to save me from a system, and they just made arguments about mitigation. Prosecutors, they trying to prosecute the case, so they making arguments about aggravation. And nowhere at no time was I encouraged to really think about the human impacts that I had, and I couldn't have did it at that stage. I was traumatic, I was violent, I was sick with ideas of what it meant to be a man as a boy, And so, and then when I got to prison, in the prison culture, I only had to talk, you don't have to talk about your crime. When you first get there, you get a paperwork check. For that means if you haven't prosecuted, you haven't participated in a prosecution, you ain't told on nobody, you ain't snitched on nobody, you ain't took the stand on nobody, you ain't committed any sexual offenses or offenses that involve children, you're good, right? According to the prison culture. And you never have to talk about your crime again. Staff, counselors, officers, they're told don't go there. So I never had to account for the human impacts that I had. And then I spent 9.5 years in solitary confinement, and that just compounded all of the issues. And it was there for the sake of my sanity that I decided to start writing, because it was in an environment to where the only socially acceptable emotions expressed was anger and frustration. And in my mid-20s, I had started to feel regret, remorse, vulnerability, loss, confusion, and I was in an environment that I couldn't process that. So I started writing, and then, won a bunch of awards, which got me a different platform, which helped raise me and elevate my story to gaining community support and other opportunities that eventually led to my commutation by former Governor Kate Brown. And when I came home, I immediately went to work with Church at the Park, which is a faith-based organization here in Salem, Oregon, building tiny home communities for the houseless. And I began to go to work for Regroup, which is a support and empowerment network of formerly incarcerated people. And as of January 1st of this year, which is when I stepped down, but as of then, over 3 years, we had 0 recidivism amongst our participants. And as far as I know, we were the only organization whose membership was open across the whole state to everybody, not restricted by county or program participation. And we did it by centering thriving, by focusing on thriving. In my work with Regroup, you got the time? All right. In my work with Regroup, I got to go, Vital Social Projects, Waverly Foundation, Sunshines. I got to go all across the nation looking at other reentry programs and what people were doing and what they were doing well. And, everywhere I went, it was clear that people understood education, or people understood that employment and housing was huge issues. And what we did at Regroup, we started asking, okay, we understand that the basics to surviving in a successful reentry is employment and housing, but why are we defining our mere survival as the goal or as the success when we have the capacity to thrive, right? And what we did, we relied primarily on a peer-to-peer model and a mutual aid model, because we prided ourselves on being a group of credible messengers, and all of the grants required system partners, and half of our community wasn't cool with that idea. So we knew right from the gate we was gonna have to try to figure out how to support each other. And so we started showing up, we started picking up each other, we started calling each other, we started talking to each other, we was sharing resources, creating information, and continuing the work that we had actually started inside. And through that work, one of the projects that we took on and contributed to, led really, was Ballot Measure 112, which removed the authorization of slavery from the Oregon Constitution. That was an effort that a lot of people in here helped with too. And out of that effort, I got the opportunity to go work for the Ubuntu Climate Initiative, which took me really all around the world looking at, or not all around the world, all around the country and other parts of the world, looking at the intersections of art and healing. And I was been focused on in reentry that's where my interest is now, is because whereas we talk a lot about the employment and the house, so many of us know that, what I think we need to also start talking about is the necessity of healing and being in recovery from carceral impacts. And I think nature has a role in that. And we're also missing an opportunity to develop leadership from those that are coming home, from those that have committed their life to becoming better people and went through them personal transformation processes and educated ourselves. I got all the degrees and the certificates and all that stuff, read all the Goschalk books, know all the evidence, data, participated in the work committees on legislation. not just the academic, but the lived experience, having went through it and done it. Once we learn how to leverage that experience and empower that leadership and enable that healing, we're going to be able to figure out how to change this low recidivism rate that actually hasn't changed too much in the last 30 years. Right? So I think in reentry, and particularly credible messengers that have done the work in that field, has the solution to shifting the paradigm in Oregon.
Beautiful. Thank you, Sterling. Chris, you're on. Should be live.
Good morning. My name is Christopher Lambert. I'm from North Portland. My story is kind of similar to any other young black man growing up in Northeast or North Portland. I come from a family of love. Although my father was never there, I say I was raised in a two-parent home because my mother and my grandmother raised me. Everything was smooth as growing up, just doing the regular things, playing sports, hanging out with friends. You know, the small criminal activity that we did, we stole, bottles and chromies off of wheels, just the childish things. And as I was in Northeast Portland, my grandmother stayed in Northeast Portland. As I was in North Portland, my grandmother stayed in Northeast Portland. My grandmother was involved in a horrible domestic violence situation where she was ran over by a truck and dragged a block away. When that happened, that's when I first encountered anger. I wanted to do some damage to the individual that did that to my grandmother. Of course, I didn't know how to deal with that anger. I walked around in my neighborhood with a bat, and it was actually, I was a part of a program called Gang Peace, and I had a mentor, David Jackson, DJ OG1, who actually spoke to me and really gave me the scope of, okay, if I do this, if I do violence to who harmed my grandmother, that does nothing for my grandmother. And if I did violence, then of course I'll end up in prison. When that happened, my grandmother's house was big and she was in the hospital for about 2 years, and as she was in the hospital, we remodeled her house in order for it to be wheelchair accessible. So when I I went from North Portland, which is a pretty you kind of say like a slow part of Portland, like everything is just kind of slow, versus going to Northeast Portland where the activity is just active and live. Once I moved to Northeast Portland, my mother began to take care of my grandmother. The relationship with me and my mother kind of deteriorated, and I wouldn't say deteriorated, but the energy went all towards to take care of my grandmother. So there was a sense of a lack of love there. I eventually just found myself in the streets. I started selling drugs. I got real deep in the drug game, and unfortunately, the area I was selling drugs in was kind of somebody's area. So, I moved different areas, and then with that came the gang life. I ended up falling into the gang life, and with that came guns. One day I was selling drugs on a corner, and I wasn't supposed to be over there, and I knew I wasn't supposed to be over there. However, a situation took place, and I was threatened, and I moved and went to my neighborhood, told my friends, got them all riled up, and nothing happened. I happened to be out one night going to a concert, and I ran into that same individual. And in the matter of us arguing, to me leaving, to me being followed, in a matter of 20 seconds, I let my gun go off 8 shots, and I ended up injuring 3 individuals. With that mentality, I was moving off a street mentality, and that street mentality is kill or be killed. I didn't want to die, so most definitely moving off that mentality, I was activated in that way and moving with a gun for the sake of my life. That shooting took place 2 weeks later. I was arrested. In the midst of that taking place, there's no social media or anything like that. I didn't know if anybody had died. I didn't know if anybody got shot. I didn't know nothing. I was so deep in the streets that I just went on normally about my life and tried to avoid the police to my best extent. I ended up going to a party. I ended up getting shot at, and the police happened to be canvassing the scene. And obviously the police knew me, and I went to jail for a DUI warrant. Once I go to jail for a DUI warrant, they opened my cell and let me know that they was charging me with 4 counts of attempted aggravated murder, 4 counts of assault, and 8 counts of unlawful use of a weapon. Still didn't know the severity of my crime, like what was going on, the severity of that. It took about 2 days in order for me to process that. I was charged with some serious things. As I was going through that process, I was in the county jail, and there's nothing for me to do in order to like pour into myself. So I just adapted to the street mentality again, which is, you know, gang banging in prison or in county jail to selling drugs to nothing. It came a point where I just wanted to be out the cell, so I decided to get in school, high school classes, GED classes, because that was the only way for me to get out my cell was 23 and 1. My counselor ended up taking a real liking to me and really pouring into me, and I ended up passing about 4 tests before I was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The street life had me so numb to reality that when I got sentenced to 20 years in prison, it didn't faze me at all. To the point where like this come with the life that we live. It didn't hit me until I talked to my grandmother and I told her how much time I got, and she asked me how much time I got, and although I only got 20 years, I said, Grandma, that gave me life, because that's what it felt like. It was the words from my grandma that kept me going, and those words was, you got a pill, don't you? And I said, yeah. So we pushed all the way, and those words right there like gave me the strength to move forward. Once I was sentenced to prison, I was sentenced to Eastern Oregon, far away from my family, 3 hours away from my family, and I think that's one of the problems that come to sentencing. People happen to get all this time and they get sent far away from their family. The family is a needed structure as a person is going through incarceration. If it wasn't for my family and my friends, I wouldn't have the urge to want to do better. I always say that the amount of support I had while I was in prison, because I had a ton of support, the amount of support I had in prison, I can't pay nobody back no amount of money on what they did for me. The only thing I can do is come home and be a better person and be great and keep my mother proud. I did, my first 5-10 years in prison, I sold drugs to provide for myself, involved in little petty DRs for having somebody else's CD, like ended up in a hole for extra pair of drawers, just, you know, the pettiness that really interrupted how I was doing my time. It was during the time that I was involved in a 175-man riot that I was in the hole for 6 months. There's nothing to do in the hole but read and write. So I most definitely, and I had to sit with myself and ask myself, what did I want different for myself? I started to read books. I started to distance myself from certain crowds. When I got out the hole, I ended up getting a job, interviewing for a job, and got a job at the DMV call center at OSCI. To leave Eastern Oregon after doing 10 years, I actually felt like I was being paroled to get up out of there to go to another prison.
You got about 1 more minute.
Okay. Did the 20-year parts. One thing that changed me is when I was in OSCI, I had a group of individuals, they had life, and they was really invested in me and got me involved in the Inside Out classes through University of Oregon. Those classes provided me with a sense of leadership and a sense of confidence. When I got clemency by the former Governor Kate Brown, and since I've been home, I've been working knee-deep in my community. I've created a safe place for kids to come. We've had over 180 kids at each event in Portland, Oregon at the Blazers Boys and Girls Club. And as far as reentry and the things that helped me, no system was in place to help me. It was my community. It was my friends. When I first got home, I was able to get a job at my friend's restaurant called Trap Kitchen. That right there provided me with the resources to take care of myself and really get into the work. And by the grace of God, my friend Sean appointed me the Regional Service Director at Rose City Jam. And since we've been going, we've been having a huge impact in my community, and I see it every day. And it's on me and my friends that we working with the youth to curb that violence, but we also hope that we inspire those that come from the same life so they want to do the same thing.
Thank you, sir.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Nick Krapser. As I sat up here today, I had no idea who I was going to be on the panel with. I saw Sterling walk up, and I thought, Jesus, please let me go before him. I don't have anywhere the story that guy does or the ability to tell it, so I'm sorry to bore you all, but my story is pretty simple. I was raised in a dysfunctional family. And I just didn't know that there were such things as functional families. I didn't know that. I'm sure that there's a lot of folks that can relate to that. I thought that television shows were just like, that was like the idea that people aspired to. I remember going over to my girlfriend's house when I was like 14, 15 years old for dinner, and her dad was sitting at the table, and her dad was like, so what happened with you today? And how was your day? And the family was all eating together. I thought, you gotta be kidding me. This is real? Like there's no plates being thrown around or anything? This is like really what people do? So I kind of learned that there was gonna be problems in my life because of dysfunction. I led a actually relatively normal existence until I found drugs, and then I was off to the races. I don't think there's such thing as a great addict, but I was a terrible addict. My life went from whatever it was to zero in a matter of minutes. And I was it was bad. So my shelf life as an addict was really, really small. I remember going to jail, getting out of jail, and going right back. I was out for sometimes hours before I would turn around and go back. And I remember at one point in time when I finally made the decision to get clean and I went to jail, the Justice Center, one of the deputies at the Justice Center kind of motioned for me to come up here, and she did her own little faces of meth, turned the screen around and looked at it, and you can see all my mug shots on there, and she, had the little coming to Jesus talk with me about like, what are you doing differently now? Because you look a lot different. Because I had not used drugs, and I was trying to clean up a little bit of my, my wreckage that I had caused. I had a 48-month prison sentence, nothing compared to what these gentlemen have dealt with, and I got so lucky because when I went to prison a long time ago, it was kind of the beginning of the AIP phase, and it was when they were handing out really generous time cuts, and I did 12 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days on a 48-month sentence. Not that I was counting, but I went to the same place in Eastern Oregon that sucked. It was terrible. No prison is great, but yeah, it sucked in Eastern Oregon. You didn't get visits from your family because it's a lot to put on somebody to come out, especially in the wintertime when there's 3 feet of snow on the ground, and it's a pretty hard thing to ask them to come out and be out there. But one of the things that Paul didn't mention when he was reading my bio is that when I got out of prison, I got to go to Sponsors, where Paul is the former executive director, and he was actually one of the case managers that I had while I was there. And I had the privilege of going through that program and learning some really important accountability and getting my life really back on track. And then 6-7 years later, I had the privilege of going back to work there. So I got to work for Paul for a number of years at Sponsors as the deputy director, and it was great. We only have one of those, most people only have one of those where they can go to work where they went to treatment or where they had reentry support or where they got that extra support that they needed. I have been very fortunate that I had never had to go back to jail or prison again. And for me, it was just a matter of wanting to change myself and do something completely different because my life was a mess. And it was really easy for me to say because there was nothing good that came from anything that I did while I was in active addiction. So all of my worldly possessions that I had when I got out of prison, you could fit in one of those glass cups and still have room for my self-esteem and ego and all that other good stuff on top of it. So being able to rebuild all that stuff and do it from scratch was great. And I didn't realize it at the time, of course, but there aren't reentry programs like Sponsors everywhere, and was an awesome program for me to go to. And Sponsors was, very small then and very huge now, and it's, relative to the impact that it's having on the community. So very fortunate to be able to do that. One of the biggest things that I had dealt with in my life outside of addiction was just trying to get myself straight again. And I realized going through, I was very fortunate when I was in prison to be able to go through the drug and alcohol program. So I learned a lot of those things. They had a captive audience with me. I wasn't doing much else while I was in prison. So being able to go through that drug and alcohol program was great. And I realized at the time, of course, it has more of an impact now, but there's 15,000 people in prison and 200 people in the drug and alcohol program, and those numbers just don't add up. I mean, there's a lot more people that have drug and alcohol problems. Where are you going, Paul? Is it something I said, or? Okay, we'll see you later. Have a good afternoon. There's a lot more people that have drug and alcohol problems than there are getting services, and that was a terrible thing. So I feel very fortunate that I had the opportunity to do that drug and alcohol program while I was in there and to take a look at some of the things in my life that made doing drugs sound like a good idea. And that's very important for me because it was a big privilege being able to do that and then get out and start applying some of those things in my life. That's nearly 20 years ago, and I've been able to do a lot of really great things. And I just devoted myself to, when I left prison, I saw that there was so much need with the people that are in there and so much need with the people that are going in. And anybody that works in the system knows that the high amount of mental health, the acuity of mental health is so much different now than it was even 15 or 20 years ago, that it's not saying that the need is less, right? It's saying that the need is more. And so the work that you all do is extremely important, and I just devoted myself to, for the rest of my life, it's what I want to do because it's so needed. So I think that's it for me.
You got a few more minutes?
No, please, go ahead.
Tell us about, your education and the work that you're doing now.
Oh, that's boring. When I got to, one of the coolest things that I have had a chance to do is to go back, to go into work for the Department of Corrections. So in 2017, I was very fortunate to be able to get my record expunged. So I walk into a job with no criminal record, and I get to work for the Department of Corrections. And to me, it was one of those things that was that's where I met Sterling. He's already told the story, so I don't feel like I'm fronting him off there, but that's where I met Sterling, was working at the penitentiary. So to me, it was important because I went back to the place that I went, right? To me, going back to that place was being able to help people out and being able to have an impact in people's lives that were in similar situations to where I'm at, or where I was. While I was working for the Department of Corrections, I got to start a diversion program where folks that because the standard practice is you get a dirty UA, you go to the hole, you lose your visits. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that happens as a result of a positive UA. So we started a diversion program that looked a lot like drug court, where people got to divert their DR or their whatever it was that they did to be able to opt into working with a recovery mentor and do recovery mentor stuff and do a certain amount of hours, and at the end of the time period, then you had a chance to get that dismissed. And during that diversion program, you didn't have to lose your cell, you didn't have to lose your job or your visits, because these guys were going to the hole and they were coming out and starting over again in the kitchen and being in the place that they didn't want to be. So it's really discouraging for a lot of the folks that go down there. And I'm not taking the accountability portion away. I'm just saying that when you get all that stuff taken away from you, there's no incentive to want to continue to do good, right? You're starting from the ground up again. So what's the incentive to continue doing good? So these guys were great. And I remember being told, hey, I don't think there's a lot of people going to opt into your program. And we were full immediately. It was just, there were so many people, and granted, some people were like, yes, I got a freebie, but there was a lot of people that were looking at it like it's a good opportunity to, to do something different with themselves. So we had the opportunity to get folks licensed as recovery mentors and get folks licensed as drug and alcohol counselors. And to me, that's one of the greatest things that I've been able to do to feel like I made an impact. It's not the easiest place in the world to work, but it's definitely, it was nice to be able to help to contribute to that.
Great. Super. Well, I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Carol, what have we got in the queue?
Switch it up from this side now. So the first one says, what were challenges that you faced when getting out of the jail setting, like in regard to any of the community resources that you needed, for example, the Oregon Health Plan?
Great.
I can go with that one real quick. I got out in 2007, and that was like the worst time to try to get a job. And I remember going to employers saying, listen, I'm going to get in trouble with my PO if I don't have a job, so I will work for free. I don't even care. Just like get me on the payroll. I'll volunteer. It was pretty difficult to try to find a job at that time. Luckily, sponsors had a bunch of connections with folks that were able to get folks easier time getting a job. But it was probably one of the worst times that I can think of to try to get a job. There were people I was competing with that had master's degrees to get a job at a call center. It was pretty tough. So, but I had a very soft landing. I'm not going to try to say that it was tough for me in the sense that I went to sponsors, and if you just let them guide you, they were able to get through all of that stuff. So, that was a pretty easy time for me. It was tough to get a job, but it was a pretty easy time.
I think for me, like I said, when I came out, I really didn't have any resources. I leaned through my community. My community was there, but I also had the mind frame that, if I was working in prison getting $30 a month, that I was for sure going to work somewhere for $17 an hour. With that determination, I was open to do anything. And at this time, I'm employed as an intensive case manager, working with all the high-risk gang members in Portland, Oregon, and I'm helping them transition out of that life at their own will, but just being a support system there. So leaning on my community was the only help that I really had.
I was very fortunate in the amount of support and opportunity that I came out to. I didn't experience any challenges in terms of housing or employment. I got off to a really good start. My challenges came probably, I say, about 6 or 7 months out when I started to realize that I was still in a hypervigilant state, that I'd be, in the Cheesecake Factory trying to figure out why this fucking waiter keep walking by me 3 or 4 times, you know what I mean? And I remember I went to a training, I came out and I immediately went to work for Lewis and Clark and Willamette University, and I remember the very first training I went to, we were sitting around the table like this. Somebody asked me a question, like, hey, where are you from? We was out at Hood River. I was like, oh, I'm over here from Salem. And it's like, where are you with? And I'm like, Greek group, Transformative Justice Community. It's like, yeah, and I'm like, what's up with all these questions? Right? And it took me a minute to realize, this is normal social dynamic. Right? And then the other thing, I started to realize that it had been so long since I had cried. And, and when I was sitting there at a waterfall during the sunset, looking at all these different beautiful colors and finally feeling like this sense of peace and tranquility, I started crying, and it was like, and when I say cry, I wasn't bawling. It was a couple. I wasn't bawling, man. It just, y'all don't tell nobody. This is between me and all of us, right? But I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, I done came through all of this, and I'm gonna lose my mind by a waterfall and just start crying for no reason. And so I really started thinking about what that meant. And what that was is it was okay. I was finally okay, like starting to let my guard down. I had thought that because I had learned how to dance in my armor that I was okay, and I didn't even realize how heavy how heavy of a burden it was. You know, I would frequently be celebrated for my ability to keep my head up through all things and continuously be resilient. It doesn't matter. Peel after peel, effort after effort, denied, you just keep going. And, you know, and I knew very well that I had the ability not to be impacted by negative emotions, but now I was struggling to connect with my positive emotions. I had been able to shut off so much that it was like, how do I reconnect? And, you know, and that popped up in interpersonal relationships. That popped up with a sense of guilt. All of my friends and family that was mostly lifers are still behind the bars. And here I am. I got to do the greatest, not just for me, but for all of them. And, you know, I found myself struggling with, what am I supposed to do now that I've achieved everything that I wanted? And there wasn't a lot of conversations like that. They'd be like, you got 3 jobs, you working too much, and, you know, so on and so forth. So for me, the biggest challenge was, you know, not the necessities that you come out right out the gate with. And in our work with Regroup, what we noticed, a lot of us came home at a unique time in history, between the Ramos decisions, between the unprecedented use of commutation power, the COVID, the firefighters. We had a lot of our peer groups come home simultaneously. So we almost had like this unintended social experiment where I know damn near most of these people, right? Literally just mobilizing them people was how we was able to run a campaign. And what we started realizing, like, it just in that case sample, I'm not the academic, I ain't studying all that stuff, but in all the people I know, and then I'm talking about specifically, none of us struggled right out the gate. Right? We were inside working on release plans and dissolving toxic masculinity. We were collaborating with inside out programs and Willamettes. We came out with an idea that we wanted to do good, and we didn't get discouraged by employment challenges or anything like that. And what we started seeing that it was actually about a year to 18 months when people would start to have a destabilizing thing, whether it was a breakup, a loss of a job, got laid off, or they done took on all these bills, reoccurring bills, and that's when they would start struggling with, you know, the emotional and the mental aspect of having to transition into a new life. So.
Beautiful. Carol.
The next question is specific to Chris, but I think it applies for everybody. Do you feel like prison saved your life? And if not, where do you think you would be today if there was no intervention?
I most definitely feel like prison saved not only my life, but possibly somebody else's life. I take it as me going to prison was a comma from God, where I really had to sit with myself and actually let my guard down and receive all the love and the genuine care that people have for me, having that care for me. Going to restorative justice, taking accountability for my actions, going to inside out classes, having people believe in me and pour into me was the intervention that I needed. So I most definitely think prison did save me. And the interventions that came from programs within the prison most definitely were the intervention for me to want to do better, but it's also I seen the pain that my mother went through when I went to prison. Although I got sentenced to 20 years, my family had to do that 20 years with me. I felt bad for that, and seeing the hurt on my mom's face, I didn't want that to be my life, but I don't want that to be nobody else's life. And that's why, you know, when we, you know, with Oregon Justice Network and Rose City Gym, when we talking to the kids, we bring up the mother aspect, because I don't care how hard you is, your mom is your soft spot. And I bring that up, I'd be like, you know, my mom cried, I don't want to see your mom go through the same thing my mom had to go through. And that's the way we connect with them and really gain their trust and pour into them and be a supportive system for them.
Great. Either one of you?
Yeah, I feel like 100% it saved my life, but with the caveat that I had the most perfect prison experience you could imagine. I think that prison was designed for, right? A person goes in, they get the programming and the rehabilitation that they need. Of my 12 months, I spent 8 months in that program. So that's the reason it saved my life. I came out with a bunch of tools and things that I needed to be successful. That's not the story everybody has. There's people that come out of prison after 10, 15, 20 years and didn't get any of those services. So I had the most ideal experience. If you were going to create a new prison system, that's what you would want everybody to have, is that go in, get the services that they need, come out, be ideal members to be your neighbor. So that was the most perfect experience I could have had. Not saying it was fun, it was like, Disneyland or anything, but it was the best outcome you could have had.
Yeah, and I'll just say, having worked with thousands of people over the years coming back to the community, that the longer people stay in prison, the more likely they are to become institutionalized and have a more difficult time re-entering the community. And I've seen a lot of people who after 10, 15, 20 years just couldn't handle it. And so it always strikes me that people like Chris and people like Sterling, who've done significant amounts of time, have been able to hold on to that sense of self, that dignity, and do the internal work despite all of the dysfunction that occurs in prisons, all of the drama, because it's easy to get caught up in it. And it's much more difficult to push against that and then get out and address all of the myriad barriers that people experience.
And, I got a little slightly different view. I'm able to celebrate my life despite my prison experience. And I unequivocally attribute my personal transformation to love and education. And particularly, the form of support, people that never gave up on my humanity, and I can take it in terms of systems analysis. I can take it back to being a 12-year-old kid who just lost his mom and was uprooted from his home and sent to a little country bumpkin school in Arkansas, and get sent to detention for emotional outburst. And then I'm understanding, I can look back and I can see how, I received probation. At times I should have received therapy. I look back at the environments that I was placed in as a child suffering that actually exacerbated that, particularly I was placed in group homes. 2 of the 5 group homes that I was placed in eventually ended up getting shut down by the state for abusing children and the abuses that would happen in them places. School, I got in trouble in school and they suspended. They kicked me out, and my outburst. And as a kid, I was actually quiet. To this day, I'm actually an introvert. People don't believe that, but I was actually quiet. And then after the death of my mom, I started having these emotional outbursts that got treated as a behavioral issue, that got punished. So I was punished all the way. I was punished with double life without, triple 23. Like, they didn't help. The system didn't help. And then when I refused to let my spirit be broken, they threw me in solitary confinement. The people that invested in me was volunteers. The programs that helped me the most, that gave me, education was so important because with new information, I could have new ideas. And with new ideas, I could reimagine what was possible for me in the world. So whereas I might have once idolized Al Capone, I was now looking at Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King and Gandhi and Viktor Frankl, and that all came through education. And these fuckers put me in the hole for having books that weren't mine. Right? And I'm the outlier. Just because I come home and I'm working on my emotional growth and my spiritual well-being and giving back, I had to fight for the opportunities that I got. And the people that invested in me and helped in me, you know, they were often barred or discouraged. And so I have seen the system. You know, I did 28 years inside, so I've seen different administrations and different cultural environments and stuff, different atmospheres. And I came home a little over 3 years ago, and when I was leaving, there was starting to be a shift. And that was you know, there was starting to be a shift, but for the most part, it was, you know, you get sentenced, you get thrown beyond the wall, you follow the rules, otherwise you get punished, and that was it. It was people that cared, that invested love in education, and that's what changed me, and that's how I got to a point to where I am now, so.
Beautiful. Well, Carol, I don't think we have time for any more questions, although we could continue this conversation much longer. I want to extend my gratitude and thanks to each one of you for sharing so much about your stories. Please help me give these three remarkable individuals a big warm hand. Ken? Nope, there you are. Good. Yep.
Thank you, Paul, for that amazing, insightful, and thought-provoking discussion. So now we're going to transition into our first round of breakout sessions so we can dive into some of our topics more deeply.